I'm going to try to do is talk through what we did with the Stanford Open Policing Project and talk through some of the terminology that we use and why we use it, when we use it, because one of the things that happens when you're covering policing is that it's easy to use words that may mean something other than what you intend. And so, especially when you're talking about statistical analysis of police stops, which is one of the things I'm going to talk about, being precise is actually really critical. And so I'm going to talk through some of that. And then I'm going to talk about a few of the resources that are out there that can help you do kind of more contextual coverage of criminal justice and policing in your community. Okay, so this is where we get to this terminology question. So there's disparities, what I've described about the differences in search rates and even the differences in stop rates, right? Those are disparities, they're differences. And then we have, but those disparities can happen for a lot of reasons. So, in fact, we were just talking about one. The Nashville Police Department had really, really high disparities, and we ended up doing a study with them. And they were searching minority drivers way more often than white drivers. And then that hit rate had that huge disparity. But were they actively going out and trying to discriminate against drivers of color? They were not. They were following a faulty policing model that they thought was good. And their faulty policing model was that they thought if they stopped drivers who had cars with equipment problems, they would reduce crime. And that's not true. If you stop cars that have broken taillights, you're not going to reduce crime. But that's what they believed. They were not trying to actively discriminate against drivers of color, or so they said. In fact, they contracted with our researchers, not me, to study that. And so they looked at all of their stop information, Shard Goel and his researchers, and said, look, stopping cars because they have equipment problems is not going to reduce crime. Let me show you this statistically. And they did. And the Nashville PD said, oh, we were wrong. We're not going to make any more equipment violation stops. Guess what happened to their disparities? Plummeted, right? They have much better stop, it's much more equitable now across the race and ethnicities. Not completely gone away, sadly, right? But that was not all discrimination. That was just following the model, however well-intentioned or misinformed, but they were not actively trying to discriminate. It's just that they had a disparate impact. The disparities had a disparate impact upon different populations. There are cases where we see evidence of discrimination, and what's the difference? It's when you can rule out these other things. So like when we were looking at our search and hit rate universe, we took out equipment violation stops. Let's just talk about places where police officers don't have a lot of choice. If they're X number of miles over the speed limit, or if it's a speeding ticket and they're being dispatched to stop speeders, they're unlikely to be able to see the race of the driver when they're going by at 70 or 80 or 90 miles an hour. They go after them, and then do we see differences, right? And so, and then if you're still seeing differences at the search and the hit rate, then that could be because once they stop them, there is some subtle evidence of bias or discrimination happening. And then that's when you really want to dig into, is there actual discrimination happening?
And initially, when I got this mission, we were talking about stereotypes. We were talking, and I was going to come up here as a person of color and say, look at all these problematic depictions of people of color. Stop doing it. But as I chewed on this mission, like so much things with race and crime in society, I realized that this is a little bit less on us, more on y'all. And what I mean by that is the white-centric gaze in which journalism is often viewed. And that is why we are often blind to some of these issues and the magnitude in which they affect our society. And so hopefully, if I could shift some of this subjectivity, this white subjectivity, and get you guys grounded into the scale of the problem that we're looking at, you won't put your foot in your mouth so easily. Because we do it all the time. And so the first thing I see when it comes to making mistakes about crime, police, and race reporting is One, we're still very centered in whiteness. We just kind of ignore it. And here's where we get into this major problem, okay? Because it would already be bad enough if this was happening on the scale to all Americans, but we know that it's happening to a targeted set. And so when we go out here and we ignore this problem, right, in any of our stories, if this is not front and center, at the very least, right, you are white-centric because you're ignoring, right, the voices and the damages of other Americans in your country. And at the very worst, it's white supremacists because you're saying that the status quo is okay. We are journalists here, and I've been in so many of these panels where we talk about what's happening to essentially the people that look like me. And we're sitting here, and I go and I turn on the TV, and we're talking about stories of how police are meeting with black fathers for donuts and coffee, as if a pastry can bridge the gap between policy and violence, right? They're like, we can't do anything about that, but we can give you a Dunkin' Donut. All right, so when we report, if that is not centered, right, in most of your crime reporting, you're already out the gate liable to start making mistakes through sheer ignorance, right? There are black people, right, brown people who have loved ones who've been killed, incarcerated, or simply terrorized by the criminal justice system. Me as a black man, right? I think you guys hear knocks on your door at night, and you're like, is that a burglar? I hear knocks on the door, I have to say, is that a burglar, or is that a SWAT team who come here and kill me? And nothing will happen. That is my reality. That is a terror that is often immeasured and not ever captured in news. And I've done nothing wrong. I'm not a criminal or anything. But that's a fear that we have to walk with. So one of the things is that when it comes to criminal justice reporting, half the time we just need to stop and think, right? And I think that's worth it because from all the data we've heard before, the stakes are so high, right? Right? This is we're kind of at war level reporting here because people are dying, people are losing their life and property. One of the things that we also fail is that we don't focus on the end effect. We talk about how, this really kind of stems a lot of the time because we focus on police, right? And we need to understand that police they're very much kind of the entry point, right, of when someone enters into the criminal justice system. And so many times our reporting starts with the police say they're going to roll out this program. There's a new law enforcement initiative. And we never come back to see, did the charges even stick? Right? There's stories coming out here now that's like we've gone out and reported on people and they've gotten arrested and they put dope on the table and come to find out a year later these people were innocent and we never cleared their names. Right? And we just let that out there. Writing these stories that these cops are really successful, right? Getting a whole lot of drug dealers, a whole lot of bad guys off the street and everyone went home and they wasted taxpayer dollars. The other thing that we need to find out is just this right here is that the criminal justice system is bogged down and mostly, and I wanted to remind you guys this, when you see all these felony cases come in through your emails, right, through district attorneys and stuff like that, so still the majority of the cases that we're focusing on is misdemeanors and non-violent offenses, right? And so when you see these types of rollouts of these expensive programs, y'all need to have this in mind, right, that this is not really facing the majority of the people that are entering into this system, okay? The other thing that I mentioned as well is just the sheer terror. I think we just don't capture that, right? The lifestyles of black and brown Americans who don't even enter the criminal justice system at all. I think one of the things that white people in this country don't really understand is that this affects how we move and breathe in our society. Like all the stuff we talked about getting pulled over, right? Like the veil of darkness. Did you know that there are black people who are probably driving at night because they feel safer? Y'all should be ashamed of this. This is bad, okay? And so,
the Bakersfield story that I talked about,
yeah.
There was a guy on a bicycle just riding his bike, but it was dusk. Police officer saw him, thought he looked suspicious, chased him. Guy rides his bicycle to try to get away from him because he's being chased, hadn't done anything wrong. Police officer catches him and pulls out his baton and breaks his leg. There were no charges filed, and there was no discipline meted out to that officer. Any of the officers, out of all of those 31 bones that were broken, no discipline, not any.
Yeah, and then, like I said, half the time, like, we talk about that initial, like, there's an arrest, someone got tackled, we walk away from that piece, but we don't talk about that there's nothing happened. There's nothing happened. That's accountability right there. We leave it on the table. And so what happens is that, and this is my favorite part, right? Because as a news media industry, I think we kind of miss this, right? When you report a reality that is not true, okay? And there's a segment of the population that turns on the TV and your perception of the police is like, you know, pink, green, and whatever, and they walk outside their window and their reality is gray, you look dumb. And they're gonna stop watching the news. And this, again, has been borne out through reports. That as a black person, if I turn on and see constant depictions of police in a light that does not match what I experience, right, you are discredited. So this is why we have to get this right. We don't report root causes. Again, because we are so police-centric, we have a tendency to focus on when the person first interacts with the criminal justice system, when the police officer first captures them. And because of that, police often front like, you know, like, hey, we know how to stop this. But as we've been told before, that we know that poverty and economics and location, even weather can affect, right, who and why people are going out and committing crime.